The morning sun rose slowly over the town, painting the sky with soft orange and pink. Students hurried toward the tall brick building that was the local high school, their voices mixing with the sound of slamming locker doors and sneakers against pavement. Some laughed, some yawned, some complained about homework, but all of them were already part of the rhythm of the place. For them, this school was familiar, loud, and predictable. But for Amara, it was different. She stood at the edge of the campus with her backpack slung tightly over one shoulder. It was her first day at this new school, and every sound, every stare, every hallway felt unfamiliar. Her family had moved from another city only a week ago, leaving behind her old friends, her neighborhood, and the school where she had once felt comfortable. She took a deep breath, her fingers brushing against the strap of her bag. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Stay strong, Amara. Don't let anyone shake you. Remember who you are." Amara nodded quietly to herself, whispering, "I will." Her brown eyes scanned the sea of students, none of whom knew her yet. She adjusted her jacket and stepped forward into the noise of the hallway. Inside, lockers slammed, voices bounced off the walls, and posters hung announcing football games and dances. Amara walked carefully, her steps steady but cautious. She kept her books close to her chest, hoping to blend in and avoid unnecessary attention. But her quiet presence did not go unnoticed. Eyes turned toward her, curious, measuring, whispering. "Who's the new girl?" One student murmured, "She looks tough." Another replied, though the tone was not admiration but mockery. Amara heard fragments but kept her face calm. Her jaw firm, she was used to whispers. She had heard them before in other places. But she also knew that whispers were nothing compared to what could come next. She found her first classroom and slipped into a seat near the back. The teacher gave her a polite nod, announcing briefly, "Class, this is Amara. She's new here. Let's make her feel welcome." Some students offered quick smiles. Others barely looked up. Amara nodded politely, opening her notebook and focusing on the lesson. But even as she wrote, she could feel the stares from across the room. At lunch, the cafeteria was louder. Tables were crowded with groups already formed, laughter bouncing across the room like waves. Amara carried her tray carefully, scanning for an empty spot. She chose a small table near the corner. Setting her food down and eating quietly, her eyes stayed low, but her ears caught the voices that carried through the room. "Look at her, sitting all alone," a girl sneered from another table. "Maybe she doesn't have any friends," her friend replied, laughing. Amara lifted her head slightly, her gaze sharp, but she did not respond. She returned to her food, chewing slowly, calm on the outside but alert inside. Because she could already sense what was coming. When the bell rang for the final class, Amara walked down the hallway lined with lockers and chatter. Her shoulders were straight, her stride firm. She was quiet, but not weak, silent but not invisible. A few students stepped aside as she passed, unsure of her yet, curious about the fire they saw in her eyes. But others exchanged glances, smirks spreading across their faces. For the bullies, her silence was an invitation. They saw her as an easy target, someone they could push to feel powerful. They whispered to each other, planning, laughing. They thought she was alone. They thought she was soft. They did not know the truth of who she was. By the end of the day, Amara closed her locker and walked toward the doors. The halls had thinned, but the whispers hadn't. She could feel the weight of eyes on her back, testing, measuring, mocking. She walked calmly, refusing to rush, refusing to show fear. Her mind was steady, her heart calm. Because she knew something they didn't, Amara was not just another new girl. She carried more than books and notebooks in her bag. She carried discipline, strength, and a skill no one here had seen yet. Her silence was not weakness, it was patience. And patience was the mask she wore until the moment she would be forced to reveal what lay beneath. As she stepped outside into the cool afternoon air, Amara looked back at the school briefly, her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "They don't know me yet," she whispered under her breath, "but they will." With that, she walked down the steps, her shadow stretching long in the sunlight. And though the day had been filled with whispers and stares, Amara carried herself with the quiet power of someone who was ready for whatever came next. The second day of school began much like the first, with the noisy rush of students filling the hallways. Amara walked through the doors with her books pressed firmly against her chest, her steps steady but cautious. She had already learned the layout of the school, which hallways led to which classes, which corners were crowded, and which stayed quiet. Her goal was simple: move quietly, stay focused, avoid attention. But avoiding attention was not always possible, especially when certain eyes were already looking for her. In the center of the hallway stood a group of bullies. Well known in the school for their cruelty, they fed off the fear of others. mocking and pushing anyone who seemed weaker, anyone who stood alone. And now, their attention had shifted toward the new girl. Amara walked past them, her chin slightly lowered, but her eyes alert. She felt their gaze before she even heard their whispers. "Hey, look at her," one of them muttered. "The new girl thinks she's too good to talk to anyone," another snickered. "Or maybe she's just scared." Their voices carried easily through the hall. Meant for her to hear, Amara didn't react. She simply kept walking. Her silence only fueled their curiosity. "Why's she always walking alone?" A tall boy sneered. "Maybe she doesn't belong here." The others laughed, their voices sharp and cruel. They were used to students crumbling under their words, but Amara didn't give them the satisfaction. At lunch, the cafeteria was full of noise again. Amara carried her tray to the same quiet table in the corner. She sat down calmly, unpacking her food, ignoring the waves of chatter around her, but once again the bullies noticed, their smirks spreading as they nudged one another. "There she is," one whispered. "All alone." Like a little lost puppy, the group walked over, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. Amara looked up briefly, her eyes meeting theirs for a moment before she returned to her food. The boldest of the group leaned down toward her table, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Hey, new girl, you too good to sit with anyone else?" he asked. His friends laughed loudly, the sound drawing more attention from nearby students. Amara kept her face calm, her eyes steady. She didn't answer, she didn't flinch. She simply picked up her fork and continued eating. Her silence irritated them more than any words could have. "What's wrong? Don't you talk?" Another sneered. The group burst into laughter again, mocking her, expecting her to break. But Amara refused to give them what they wanted. She sat with quiet dignity, her posture straight, her movements deliberate. Her calmness was not weakness, it was control. It was the kind of control that came from knowing she could fight back at any moment. But choosing not to, the bullies mistook it for fear, and that mistake would cost them. One of the girls in the group leaned against the table, flipping her hair dramatically. "You don't fit in here," she said with a smirk. "This isn't your place." Amara finally lifted her eyes, meeting the girl's gaze directly. Her stare was sharp, unblinking, filled with a quiet fire. For a moment the girl faltered, but quickly recovered with a forced laugh. Other students in the cafeteria began to notice the scene. Some watched with sympathy, others with curiosity, and a few simply waited to see if something dramatic would happen. The bullies thrived on that attention, using it like fuel, but Amara remained calm, her eyes cold, her silence unshaken. She finished her food slowly, stood up and walked away, leaving them laughing behind her. They thought they had won. They thought her silence meant defeat. But Amara's silence was a choice, a shield, a test of patience. Inside, she carried a storm, and storms do not reveal themselves until the right moment. The bullies had only awakened something they were not ready to face. That evening, as she walked home, Amara replayed the day in her mind, her fists clenched briefly at her sides, her breath steady. She knew their games wouldn't stop. She knew this was only the beginning. But she also knew herself, knew what she was capable of. And she whispered softly, "They don't know me yet, but they will." The next morning, the bullies were waiting again. Their eyes locked on her as she entered the hallway, their smirks wide, their voices loud. They thought they had found their newest victim, someone to mock, someone to break. But they had chosen the wrong girl, and soon, they would learn the truth the hard way. The days that followed were not easy for Amara. Her silence had only made the bullies more determined. They had taken her calmness as weakness, her quietness as fear. And so, their whispers turned into louder taunts, sharper words that followed her down the hallways. It began in the mornings, the moment she walked through the school doors. "Hey, new girl, lose your voice on the way here?" One bully would call out, another would laugh, adding, "Maybe she doesn't talk because she doesn't know how to fit in." Their voices echoed through the hall, feeding on each other's cruelty. Amara kept walking, her chin steady, her eyes forward, refusing to let them see the storm inside her. In the classrooms, the taunts continued. When she raised her hand to answer a question, someone would snicker, "Oh, look, the new girl thinks she's smart." When she didn't raise her hand, they whispered, "See, she doesn't know anything. She's just pretending." Amara heard every word, but she stayed calm. She wrote neatly in her notebook. Solving problems with quiet focus, she told herself, "Patience, Amara, patience." Because she knew something they didn't. Her silence was not surrender, it was control. And when the time came, they would learn the difference. At lunch, the bullies took their game further. As Amara sat in her corner eating quietly, they walked by her table with exaggerated steps. One of them leaned close and said loudly, "Don't choke on your food, new girl. No one's going to save you." The others burst into laughter, their voices bouncing off the walls. Some students joined the laughter, while others looked away in discomfort. Still, Amara ate slowly, calmly, her eyes never leaving her tray. Her hands did not shake, her face did not change. She refused to give them the reaction they wanted. Her silence began to confuse them. It wasn't the silence of fear, it was the silence of someone waiting. But bullies do not like being ignored. They thrive on attention, on breaking others down, so they pushed harder. Adding new insults every day. "Where'd you get those shoes, a trash can?" One boy mocked. "Careful, don't trip, new girl." "This isn't your neighborhood," another sneered. Each word was meant to cut, to wound. But Amara's strength was deeper than their voices. She had faced harder challenges before, battles outside the school walls that had taught her endurance. The taunts stung, yes, but they did not break her. They only sharpened her resolve. In the gym, when students paired up for activities, the bullies made sure she was left standing alone. "Guess no one wants to be with her," one girl teased loudly. Amara met her eyes for a brief second, her gaze cold, sharp enough to silence the laughter for a moment. Then she walked calmly to the equipment and began working by herself. Her movements precise, her strength clear, though most didn't notice. Outside of class, in the hallways, the taunts grew bolder. They began to mimic her walk, her accent, even the way she tied her hair. "Look, I'm the new girl. I don't talk. I just stare," one bully said, mocking her expression. Their friends roared with laughter, but Amara only watched from a distance. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes unreadable by now. More students had started paying attention. Some were impressed by her calmness, whispering, "She never reacts." Others thought she was simply scared, saying, "She's tough on the outside but weak inside." The bullies believed the second version, and that belief kept pushing them closer to the line they should never cross. They thought they were in control, but they were only writing their own downfall. Amara walked home each day with the echoes of their voices still in her head, her fists sometimes clenched at her sides, but she released them slowly. She knew her time would come. She knew patience was her weapon. She whispered softly to herself, "Words are easy, fists are harder." Her calmness was not endless. It was the calm before a storm. One afternoon, as the final bell rang, the bullies decided to take their game further. They followed her down the hall, laughing louder than usual. "Hey, new girl, why don't you show us that tough face again?" one called out. "Yeah, maybe you can actually say something this time," another added. Their footsteps echoed behind her, but Amara kept walking steadily. The crowd around them grew, students sensing something was about to happen. Phones came out quietly, ready to record, ready to witness. Amara stopped at her locker, placing her books inside calmly. Then she closed the door slowly, her reflection sharp in the metal surface. For the first time, she turned to face them. Her eyes locked on theirs. The bullies smirked, thinking they had finally cornered her. They thought her silence was ending in fear, but they were wrong. Amara's silence was ending in something far more dangerous, and soon their taunts would cost them more than laughter. The bullying had moved beyond whispers and taunts. Now the group was growing bolder, testing how far they could push Amara. Each day their voices grew louder, their actions sharper, their cruelty more deliberate. They thought she was too quiet to fight back, too new to resist. It started in the hallways between classes. Amara walked steadily, her books pressed against her chest, but suddenly one of the bullies would bump into her shoulder, sending her stumbling. "Watch where you're going. New girl," they'd laugh. Their friends clapped and cheered, feeding off the spectacle. Another time, one of the girls grabbed Amara's pencil case from her desk. "Don't worry, I'll hold on to this for you," she sneered, tossing it across the room. The class laughed as the case slid under a chair. Amara stood, walked calmly to retrieve it, and sat back down without a word. Her silence unsettled some students, but the bullies mistook it for fear. In the cafeteria, their games became crueler. They walked past her table and accidentally spilled water across her tray. "Oops," one said mockingly. "Clumsy me." Amara simply wiped the table with a napkin and continued eating. Her calm response made them angrier, their smirks tighter, their need to break her stronger. But the worst came one afternoon when the final bell rang. The hallways cleared quickly, but Amara stayed behind to gather her books. As she closed her locker, she realized the bullies were waiting. 5 of them stood in a half circle, blocking the exit, their eyes gleaming with arrogance. The hallway was quiet except for their laughter. "Well, look who's all alone again," the tall boy sneered. Stepping closer, "You think you're too good for us? Walking around with that tough face?" His friends chuckled, circling tighter. Amara adjusted her backpack on her shoulder, her expression calm. "I just want to go home," she said softly, her voice steady. But her calmness only fueled their hunger for cruelty. Go home. Another bully mocked. Not until we're done with you. One of the girls reached out, smacking the books from Amara's arms. They scattered across the floor. Pages fluttering like broken wings, the group laughed louder. The sound echoing down the empty corridor, Amara crouched slowly to pick up her books. Her movements deliberate. She did not rush, she did not panic. Her silence felt different this time. Heavier, sharper, like a blade being drawn. The bullies didn't notice, they only saw what they wanted to see. Come on, new girl, one taunted. Say something. Fight back if you can. But Amara stood, her books back in her arms. Her eyes locked on them for the first time. She let her gaze burn openly. The hallway seemed to grow colder as her stare cut through the laughter. The bullies faltered for a brief moment, shifting uneasily, but pride forced them to stand tall. Refusing to show fear, the tall boy shoved her shoulder hard, making her step back. There, what are you going to do about it? He said, his voice sharp with arrogance. His friends laughed, though the sound carried nervous cracks. Amara adjusted her stance. Her feet planting firmly, she spoke softly, but every word carried weight. You don't want me to answer that, she said. The laughter quieted for just a second. Then one of the girls barked out, Oh, please, what's she going to do? They all jeered louder, covering their unease with noise. Phones appeared in hands. Some students who had lingered pulled them out, recording the scene. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Amara remained still, her silence unbroken. Her body relaxed but ready. Her patience had been tested. Her restraint stretched thin. She had endured their taunts, their games, their cruelty, but now they had crossed the line, and deep inside, she knew the storm she had kept hidden was about to break. The bullies stepped closer, their circle tightening. They thought they had her trapped, that she was finally cornered. But Amara's calm face hid something they could not see. She was not the one trapped, she was the one waiting. Waiting for the exact moment when words would no longer matter. The tall boy shoved her again, harder this time. His voice boomed through the hallway. You don't belong here, new girl. We'll make sure you remember that, the crowd gasped, some students whispering nervously. Amara's book slipped from her arms and hit the ground, the sound echoing like a signal. She straightened slowly, her fists tightening at her sides. The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone in the hallway could feel it, though they didn't understand it. The laughter, the jeers, the mocking. It all faded under the weight of Amara's stare. The bullies didn't realize it yet, but they had pushed too far. Her patience had ended, and the storm was ready to strike. The hallway was still, the air thick with tension. Amara stood in the middle of the circle of bullies, her books scattered on the floor. Her jaw tightened, her fists slowly curling, her eyes sharp like steel. The bullies laughed loudly, mistaking her silence for fear. Pick up your books, new girl, one sneered. Shoving her shoulder again, another joined in. Yeah. Hurry up before we knock them even farther. Their voices rang with cruelty, but underneath there was nervousness. They had mocked her for days, but now something about her calm stare unsettled them. Amara bent down slowly, gathering her books one by one. Her movements were steady, her face unreadable. But inside, her mind was focused, her body ready. Every muscle remembered hours of training. Every breath reminded her of the discipline she carried. When she rose to her feet, the tall boy smirked and stepped closer. Still nothing? You really are pathetic, he said, pushing her harder this time. His friends cheered. The crowd of students gasped. Phones raised higher to catch the moment. But instead of stumbling, Amara planted her feet firmly. She looked him directly in the eye and whispered, Enough. The single word was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. The bullies froze for a heartbeat, confused by the sudden shift. Then the tall boy laughed again. What are you going to do about it? He reached forward to grab her arm, confident she would pull away. But Amara didn't pull away. She moved. In a flash, her hand shot up, gripping his wrist with iron strength. His smirk vanished as his face twisted in pain. With a swift twist, she bent his arm and shoved him backward. He stumbled, hitting the lockers with a loud clang. His friends staring in shock. The hallway erupted with gasps and shouts. The bullies blinked, stunned that the quiet new girl had just fought back. Amara's body shifted into a stance both calm and dangerous. Her knees bent slightly, her fists raised, her eyes locked on the group. She was no longer the silent outsider. They could all see she was a fighter. One of the girls stepped forward angrily. You think you're tough? She spat. She swung her hand toward Amara's face. But Amara blocked it easily, catching the girl's wrist midair. She shoved her aside with controlled force, sending her stumbling back into her friends. The crowd roared louder, shock mixing with excitement. Another boy lunged toward her, his arms wide as if to shove her down. Amara sidestepped gracefully, planting her foot and sending him sprawling to the ground with a sharp push. Her movements were fast, precise, and efficient. She wasn't flailing. She wasn't wild. She was trained. Every motion spoke of discipline, of someone who had fought before. The bullies regrouped, their laughter gone, replaced by disbelief. "This isn't possible," one muttered. "She's not supposed to fight back." But Amara's eyes blazed with calm fire. "You wanted me to answer," she said coldly. "Here's your answer," her voice carried across the hallway, silencing even the spectators. The tall boy, red with embarrassment, charged at her again. He swung his arm wildly. Trying to land a hit, Amara ducked smoothly, driving her elbow into his side with controlled power. He groaned and stumbled back, clutching his ribs. His friends hesitated now, their arrogance crumbling into fear. The crowd of students cheered louder, phones capturing every second. Some shouted her name, though many had only learned it days before. Others simply stared in awe, realizing they were witnessing something unforgettable. Amara stood tall in the middle of the chaos, her breathing steady. She looked more like a warrior than a victim. The bullies, now shaken, backed away slightly. They had thought she was an easy target, someone to humiliate. But in a matter of seconds, she had turned the tables completely. Her strikes were sharp, her blocks flawless, her strength undeniable. They were no longer laughing, they were afraid. Amara lowered her fist slightly, her voice steady. "I gave you chances to stop," she said. "But you didn't listen." Her words rang with authority, calm but unyielding. The crowd hushed, hanging on every syllable. The bullies shifted nervously, unsure whether to retreat or fight again. One of the girls muttered, "She's crazy," another whispered. "No, she's dangerous." Amara's gaze swept over them, her expression cold but controlled. She bent down, picked up her books from the floor, and stood tall again. Her calmness returned, but now it carried a warning. The first strike had changed everything. The bullies had tested her patience, and they had paid the price. The hallway was no longer theirs. It belonged to Amara. And though the fight wasn't over yet, everyone could see the truth. The new girl was not weak. She was a brutal fighter, and this was only the beginning. The hallway buzzed with energy, the crowd pressing closer, phones raised high. Amara stood in the center, her books now safely back in her arms, but her stance ready. The bullies hesitated, their laughter gone, their faces pale with disbelief. They had wanted a victim, but they had awakened a fighter instead. The tall boy, red with anger and embarrassment, pushed off the lockers. "You think you're tough?" he spat, clutching his side. "I'll show you tough!" He lunged forward, swinging his fist in a wide arc. But Amara ducked low, her movement smooth, her body calm and precise. With a sharp twist, she drove her fist into his stomach, forcing the air from his lungs. The boy stumbled backward, collapsing against the lockers. Gasping for breath, the crowd erupted with shouts, gasps, and cheers. The other bullies froze for a moment, staring at their leader. They had never seen him fall before, never seen him look so weak. But Amara had dropped him with a single strike. One of the smaller boys tried to recover the group's pride. He rushed at Amara with a shove, hoping to knock her off balance. But she sidestepped quickly, grabbed his arm, and twisted him around. With a firm push, she sent him tumbling onto the floor. His books scattering, the crowd laughed loudly, their cheers echoing through the hallway. The girl with long hair shrieked in anger and charged. She swung her hand toward Amara's face, her nails outstretched like claws. Amara raised her arm and blocked the strike. Then she shoved the girl back, sending her stumbling into her own friends. The girl cried out, humiliated, her confidence broken. Now only two bullies remained standing strong, their eyes wild with fury. One clenched his fists, the other cracked his knuckles. Both stepping closer, the crowd hushed, waiting. The sound of phones clicking and recording filling the silence. Amara stood tall, her breath calm, her fists raised, her eyes steady. She looked more like a warrior than a student. The first boy swung at her again, his punch fast but sloppy. Amara caught his arm midair, pulling him forward. Her knee shot up sharply into his chest. Knocking the wind out of him, he fell to the ground, groaning. Clutching his ribs, the crowd cheered louder, voices bouncing off the lockers. The second boy froze for a moment, then roared with frustration. He charged, his shoulder aimed straight at Amara, but she pivoted to the side, her movement swift and graceful. With one motion, she shoved him hard into the lockers. The sound echoed like thunder, making the entire hallway shake. He slumped to the ground, dazed, his pride shattered. The fight was no longer a fight. It was a lesson. The bullies had tried to humiliate her, but they had been humiliated instead. Amara stood in the center of it all, her breathing steady, her eyes cold. She had not lost control. She had simply unleashed her strength. The tall boy tried to stand again, his face twisted with rage. He staggered toward her, fists raised, but Amara stepped forward quickly. Her fist striking his jaw with sharp precision. The crowd gasped as he fell backward, hitting the floor hard. This time he did not get up. Silence fell for a brief moment, heavy and electric. The bullies were scattered across the hallway. Groaning, defeated, their pride shattered, Amara lowered her fists slowly, her stance relaxing, her face calm, her eyes still sharp, her presence unshakable. She had ended the fight with power, but also with control. The crowd erupted into cheers, clapping and shouting her name. Students who had once doubted her now looked at her with awe. Even those who had laughed at her before now stared with wide eyes. They had seen the truth with their own eyes. The quiet new girl was a brutal fighter. Phones captured every angle, every strike, every fall. By the end of the day, her name would spread across the entire school. Everyone would know not to mess with her. But in this moment, Amara simply stood tall. Her books once again in her arms, she whispered softly to herself. I warned them. The bullies crawled away slowly. Their laughter gone, their arrogance broken. They avoided her eyes, their faces red with shame. The hallway that had once echoed with their voices now belonged to her. She had taken their power and turned it against them, and nothing would ever be the same. The hallway was still buzzing after the fight. Students stood frozen, their eyes wide, their mouths open in disbelief. The bullies lay scattered on the ground, some clutching their ribs, others holding their pride. Amara stood in the center, calm and steady, her breathing even, her eyes sharp. For a moment no one spoke. The only sounds were the faint groans of the bullies and the clicking of phones recording every second. Then whispers spread like wildfire. She beat them all, one student gasped. She didn't even look tired, another whispered. The tall boy tried to push himself up, his face red with shame. He looked at Amara with anger, but his eyes carried something new. Fear. Amara stepped forward, her books now resting in one arm, her other hand free. She stared down at him, her voice calm, but every word carried weight. You wanted to break me, she said. But you broke yourselves. The crowd grew silent again. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the hallway like a knife. She turned her gaze to the rest of the bullies. You thought I was weak because I was new, because I was quiet, she continued. You thought silence meant fear, but silence means control. The defeated bullies shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her eyes. The crowd leaned in closer, hanging on every word. Amara's presence filled the hallway, not just because of the fight, but because of the strength in her voice. You use fear to control people, she said. But fear is not power. Fear is weakness. Her words struck harder than her fists. Some students began nodding, murmuring in agreement. They had felt the cruelty of the bullies themselves, but none had ever stood up to them. Now watching Amara, they felt something they hadn't in a long time. Hope. The bullies had been exposed, not just as cowards, but as fragile when faced with real strength. And the entire school was watching. Amara stepped back slightly, giving the defeated group room to crawl away. But before they could leave, she spoke again. Remember this, she said firmly. Respect is earned, not taken. Her eyes narrowed, her voice steady. If you treat others with cruelty, don't be surprised when it turns back on you. The bullies lowered their heads, humiliated, their confidence shattered. The tall boy muttered something under his breath, but his voice shook too much to carry strength. His friends avoided eye contact. Dragging themselves up slowly, they looked smaller now, not just beaten, but broken in spirit. The hallway no longer belonged to them. As they limped away, the crowd erupted into cheers. Some clapped loudly, others shouted Amara's name. Phones flashed as messages spread across the school in seconds. Everyone was talking about the new girl who had taken down the bullies. Amara stood tall, but she did not smile. She raised her hand, and the noise quieted again. I don't need fans, she said firmly. I don't need a crowd. I only need respect. The students nodded, their cheers softening into silence. Her words sank deeper than the fight itself. It was not just about fists. It was about dignity. For the rest of the day, whispers followed her everywhere. But they were not whispers of doubt or mockery anymore. They were whispers of awe, respect, and even fear. The bullies picked the wrong girl, someone said. She's not just tough, she's dangerous, another replied. Amara walked through the halls with the same steady steps. Her silence remained, but now it was understood. It was no longer mistaken for weakness. It was recognized as strength. The bullies who had once ruled the school now avoided her eyes, and other students found courage in her presence. In the cafeteria, no one laughed at her corner table. Instead, A few students asked shyly if they could sit with her. Amara gave a small nod, her calm eyes softening just slightly. They sat nervously at first, but soon the tension faded. Her quiet strength was not only feared, it was admired. That evening, as she walked home, she thought about what had happened. She didn't regret fighting. She didn't regret standing tall. But she knew the fight wasn't just about fists. It was about teaching them, teaching the whole school, that no one should be judged by silence, by skin, or by being new. She whispered softly to herself. Respect is stronger than fear. The words tasted right, heavy but true. She carried her books closer to her chest, her steps steady under the fading sun. The fight had ended, but the lesson would remain, and the school would never see her the same way again. The sun rose the next morning, spilling light across the town and the schoolyard. Students filed into the building, their voices buzzing louder than usual. Everyone was talking about the same thing. The fight in the hallway. The videos had spread overnight, and now Amara's name was on every tongue. She destroyed them all, one student said, eyes wide with excitement. She's like a machine, another added, showing the video on his phone. The bullies who once strutted through the halls with arrogance now walked with lowered heads. Their bruises and silence spoke louder than any excuse they could make. Amara stepped through the front doors with her books pressed neatly to her chest. Her steps were calm, steady, the same as always. But the eyes that followed her were no longer mocking, no longer filled with doubt. Now they were filled with awe, respect, and just enough fear to keep them quiet. As she walked to her first class, students parted slightly, making space. Whispers followed her, but the tone was different. She's the new girl who stood up to them. She's not afraid of anyone. Amara kept her face calm. Her eyes forward, in the classroom, even the teachers seemed aware of the change. She glanced at Amara with a new kind of acknowledgement. The students who once snickered behind their hands now avoided eye contact. No one dared to mock her. No one dared to throw careless words. Her silence had transformed into authority. At lunch, the cafeteria was buzzing louder than ever. Normally, the bullies' table was the loudest, but now it sat quiet. They huddled together, avoiding glances, licking their wounds of shame. Meanwhile, students looked toward Amara's corner table. Some approached cautiously, trays in hand, voices uncertain. "Mind if we sit with you?" one asked softly. Amara looked up, her calm gaze steady. She gave a small nod, and they sat down, their nervousness fading slowly. Soon others joined, filling the once empty table. The corner that had once been lonely now carried a quiet strength. The bullies watched from a distance, their faces hard. But deep inside, they knew the truth. Their reign of fear was over. Their power stripped away, one of them muttered bitterly. "She ruined everything." But another whispered back, "No, she just showed us who we really are." By the end of the week, Amara's reputation had spread across the entire school. She was no longer the new girl, no longer a target. She was the fighter, the one who had stood up when no one else dared. Her name carried weight. Her presence carried power. Even teachers treated her with a new kind of respect. But Amara did not let it change her. She still walked with the same calm steps. She still ate slowly at her table. Though now with company, she still kept her books close, still focused on her studies. Her strength was not for show. It was simply who she was. One afternoon, as she walked out of class, a younger student stopped her. He looked nervous, clutching his books tightly. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice shaking, "for standing up to them." Amara tilted her head, her eyes softening slightly. "You don't have to thank me," she said calmly. "Just remember to stand tall yourself." The boy nodded quickly, his eyes shining with new courage. Amara watched him walk away, a faint smile touching her lips. She realized her fight had done more than protect herself. It had given others a voice, a sense of strength they hadn't known before. Her storm had turned into shelter for others. The bullies never fully recovered. They still lurked in corners, still whispered, still glared. But their power was gone, stripped by their own defeat. Whenever they looked at Amara, their anger was overshadowed by fear. They knew they could never break her. As weeks passed, her reputation only grew stronger. Stories spread faster than the truth, some exaggerated, some almost mythical. "She can take on 5 people at once," someone said. "She's trained like a pro fighter," another added. Amara ignored the rumors, knowing the truth was enough. She had not fought for fame, not for power. She had fought because she had no choice, because respect mattered more than silence. And in doing so, she had reshaped the entire school. Fear no longer ruled the hallways, respect had taken its place. And at the center of it all stood Amara, steady and unshaken, walking home one evening, the sky painted in gold and pink. She carried her books under one arm. Her steps strong and confident, she whispered softly, "They know me now." The words carried not pride, but peace, because Amara had proven that strength, when guided by dignity, could change everything.